Hey, it's Dave Bauer.
And this is Brian Mertens, and you're listening to ReWilding Conversations.
Hi, Brian. It's Dave.
Hey, Dave. How's it going?
Good. How about you?
I'm good. Yeah, it's sunny here, and it's also quite cold, so we're definitely settling into a darker time of year here.
Okay, yeah, and I'm looking at one of the brightest days we've had in some time, and a predicted 60-degree high in Buffalo, New York, which is certainly not our typical weather. So hoping to get some outdoor play in this afternoon.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Shall we hop right in?
Yeah, let's do it, and then we can do some further conversation later. Go ahead. Yeah, why don't you start? What would you like to chat about today?
Yeah, well, the topic that we have on the podcast agenda for today is the idea of modeling and leading by example, and it's this idea that when you're working with people in a nature connection capacity, and you're, getting people outside and exploring the land and building connections with all the different layers of nature. There's this. It's sort of like a subtle way of passing on knowledge and understanding and connection with the natural world. That's it's kind of like the difference between talking to someone about nature and saying, hey, you should do this, you should do that, you should go outside and use your senses, compared to actually just doing it yourself, just going outside and using your senses, and basically that people will pick that up from you without necessarily even having to explicitly talk about it. And so it's a really interesting thing, and I'm curious, just to hear your perspective on this topic too.
So, in the field of teaching, right, and been doing that a few years. There's this thread that we're talking about, leading by example, is not only in my professional career, but my life as a father, as a grandfather, as a human being. When we look back into other cultures, leading by example, it's not what you say, it's what you do. I mean, there's something very, very powerful and clear when any of us leads by example, by a behavioral modality. So it's powerful. It's the way to go. All I'll say, and then I'll give it back to you, is when I notice I'm talking just a bit too long to an individual or to a group, it's evident. One who pays a little bit of attention can take a look at body language and get signals pretty quickly that, okay, there needs to be movement, there needs to be some kinesthetics, there needs to be some tactile immersion, there needs to be something where the listener is engaged in a more full capacity. So there's that dynamic, I guess, that I hope we touch on today, Brian, of leading by example. Is that then, what does that look like, and all these, in terms of leading by example? And then what does that foster, ideally, in the follower, in the student, in the child, in the people that are on the excursion with you? Yeah. So, so how about coming back and me inviting you to talk a little bit about the what of leading by example. When we say leading by example, can you say a little more about your initial description, or give us an example of leading by example?
Yeah, definitely.
We'll go from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's definitely a part of this is, like especially kids, maybe around especially as you get around the ages 10, 11, 12, there's this, kids are really, they're watching the adults, they're watching the other people, and they're looking for what are the, who am I? Like, what are the qualities that I'm going to take from the people in my life? Who are my role models, the people that I'm looking up to? And I think about, like, just the difference in modeling that would happen for, like, you just take a kid who grows up in a completely nature-based culture where everybody has deep connection to nature. Everybody, knows the plants, they know the birds, they use the land for survival, all those different things. And that kid is looking at these people every day and saying, who do I want to be? Who do I want to emulate, as I get older? And there are these neurons in the brain called mirror neurons that when basically what they do is when you're like looking at another person like a smiling face, part of the way that you can empathize with what that person is feeling is that you have neurons in your brain that fire off and give you a little bit of the same emotion that the other person is experiencing. So that's one of the reasons why if you're around lots of happy people, happiness is a little bit contagious, and so you will be a happier person. And they've actually found that happiness can go through like degrees of separation. So it's so fascinating. Like it's not just if you know somebody who's happy, it's if you know somebody who knows somebody who's a very happy person, you will get a happiness benefit from knowing those people. And so it's the same sort of thing when we're talking about rewilding and connecting with nature and just, getting back to those core sensory abilities that all human beings have, but we don't necessarily always take the time to wake them up. And, if you grow up around lots of people who are deeply connected with nature, even if it's not an explicit thing, even if it's just like part of life, like not something that you're like we're talking about it really, specifically and explicitly on these conversations. But even if you didn't do that, just by growing up in that kind of environment, you would get deeply connected to nature just because your brain is like resonating with the emotional patterns and the awareness patterns of everyone around you. And, it's such a huge contrast. I mean, so many people growing up in the modern world just don't have models of, people who are like trackers or they know stuff about birds or like they garden, they care about the land and they caretake the environment. And so, that's a lot of what I mean. Like when you, by just taking people out and being curious, then the people that you're with will start to get curious too. And it's different than saying than telling them you need to be curious. It's like you could tell someone you need to be curious. It doesn't mean they're going to actually get curious. But if you just get curious yourself and share that curiosity with them, it's much easier to lead them into that experience. So, that's kind of what I mean about modeling and leading by example.
Yeah. So it's fascinating because my synapses in my brain are switching back and forth, and there are switches going back and forth because I wrote down as you're speaking, Brian, this missing models, that kids today, our culture today, is craving good models. When we look at our policy makers, when we look at almost any domain, when we look at our super athletes, when we look at lots of people that get a lot of press, there are a few, but there are regrettably a bit too few that are remarkably consistently good models. Why? Because one leads by example. So you can be a great running back, but if your behavior off the field is a train wreck, I guess I wouldn't quite put you in that category. of leading by example. Yeah, you can lead by example with a football in your hand, but I think in our world today, what we want, parents, what we want, those that have relationships as teachers, mentors, knowing that this is how we serve the world, Brian. You and I serve the world with some diligence and mentoring. The example piece is really very needed, and we need to be doing it. So I find that when I'm with younger children, I can speak very specifically, again, about my grandchildren, Sriya and Kai, who have now grown to the ages of 8 and 10. When I am present to them in this curious way, not talking about it, but being curious, as you just said, there's something about the moment that takes an interesting shift, something internally, some mirror neurons, as you most skillfully tagged them, wake up in their brains. And there's a level of attention and excitement and behavioral shift that happens in these kids that anyone who's with any other human being can witness this at any time when you lead by example, when you do it, and you do it appropriately in the right setting with wisdom. So I kind of am really hopeful that both you and I, initially, are really energized by our talk today, because we teach that what we need to know. So yes, Brian and I'll speak for me, I need to remember the need to lead by example. So I feel gifted with this topic, and I'm really going to be jotting down notes rather prolifically today, because I've become quite excited about this aspect. When we get a bit stale, when I get a bit stale, when I get a little bit stuck and bogged down, when I remember to lead by example, when I do it, all that stuckness, a lot of it, that stuckness diminishes. And that falls into cognitive, emotional, psychological, kinesthetic. A lot of it diminishes. So let's see if we can energize both ourselves and our listeners into the doing of it. Because underneath this title, Leading by Example, is this other subtitle, Just Do It. Kind of do whatever it is you're seeking to do. So
yeah.
back to you.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, like, just taking the example of, like, wildlife tracking, which is, I love doing wildlife tracking. It's such a great way to open up awareness and build sensitivity with the landscape. And oftentimes, like, if I go tracking with a group of people, one of the biggest blocks that prevents people from really going deeper with wildlife tracking, like, they're beginners, they're like, I'm interested in animals, I'm interested in, like, the tracks, and I think it's cool that if I see a track on the ground, it means an animal is there. But one of the biggest things that prevents them from, like, actually going deeper with the skill is that people, it's so simple, people just don't look closely enough. And in order to really develop some of the, like, a deeper capacity for understanding tracking, one of the most important things is just to get your face closer to the tracks. And so what often happens is, like, you find some tracks and you say, hey, do you guys see these tracks here? And they kind of, like, stand around in a circle, and they're, like, really far away from the tracks. And so one of the ways that I and I don't know how much of this is, like, I'm consciously doing this, or it's just like this is how it was modeled to me, so now I do it that way. I actually just get down on my knees, I put my face right up to the track, and I say, do you notice this? Like, I start pointing things out in the tracks, like, how many toes are you seeing here? And are you seeing claws in this? And what ends up happening is, because I'm so close, I'm, like, down, getting my knees dirty, I'm, like, sticking my face right in there, and people start to follow, and they start to basically instantly overcome one of the biggest blocks for beginners when it comes to tracking, and we haven't even talked about it. It's just a behavioral modeling thing that very naturally it's just like normal human body language, like what you were saying. You can tell when people are following you and when they're like getting bored, or all that kind of stuff. And so it's really interesting, the different applications of modeling. And I think a lot of times when like we can talk about the techniques like art of questioning, storytelling, doing, teaching like a sense meditation where you're basically guiding people to use your senses. And I think leading by example, this sort of natural transmission of who you are as a person to the people that you mentor and the people that you work with, it's a really powerful aspect of it that connects in with all the different layers.
Yeah, so, the why, why lead by example? I think we're kind of hitting it, but let's just kind of nail it now. The why for me is it's engaging. Just as you just described, when I see this nature nerd, nature mentor, Brian Mertens, down on his knees, not paying much attention to the fact that it might be a bit damp and muddy, and he's like into it, and he's looking up, and I'm above him, and I'm in his crew, and he's got this glow about him where he's seeing some details that I obviously can't see because I'm standing up. I'm more inclined to kind of come down and do it, immerse me in it. So, when to touch on the why, we take it to a really deeper, more real, more neural pathways. It becomes tactile. It becomes sensual when we lead by example, when we do it in all of its capacities and dimensions. So I know in one of the projects I'm working on right now, which is a mindfulness effort with children, I find that doing mindfulness is a delicate, interesting piece with young people because you can't do mindfulness, just like you can't do nature mentoring or nature immersion very well through an electronic device, through a screen. You kind of have to recognize that this is not going to be the way you're going to authentically lead by example. You got to put some of this stuff down, and you got to get out. You got to be more comfortable being in the space of it. So you gave a great example of being comfortable in your space, your outdoor space. Where is it? It's close. It's down. It's earthy. When I do my book readings with children, there's a page in the book about composting and all the organisms in a live working compost pile. So after I read a few selected pages, what do I open up? Well, I call a cluster of kids around me, and I open up a container, and I take this huge whiff of it. And the kids don't quite know yet what I'm whiffing. And I go, ah. And then I invite them to take a whiff of this, take a whiff. And they do. And I ask, what does it smell like? Dirt, soil. So now I lower the containers where they can keep their eyes in contact with it. And they see dark humus with a few worm bodies. And then I take my chow mein stick and I lift the mass of little worms up that are hid up beneath the soil there. And there's this nest egg of worms moving about. It becomes really very different when we get to that level of it and going beyond the reading of the page of Surya and Kai composting. I hope this doesn't diminish for our listeners the value of reading about it. It can often start that way. And then the gifted teacher, the gifted mentor, assists the learner in taking it to that next level, either in their presence or to challenge them to find some way soon to do it themselves. So, yeah. So let me pull up just a bit and bring it back over to you, and perhaps can you recall a very specific time recently, Brian, when you were really confident that you were in the presence of someone else or you really leading by example? It was remarkably evident. And a result of that, what was going on in the moment and with this other person leading or with you leading? And what was the experience like? Can you take us into an episode of that, please?
Well, I think the tracking example is definitely, that's one that has certainly happened recently.
Okay.
And, I'm going to think about that for a minute. And, I think what I'm kind of thinking about is just how even on a more subtle level, like sort of like the difference between, like you could read a book to kids and the way that you are focused in terms of like taking it back to mindfulness. Like if you're reading a book from a very mindful state of mind and a very quiet mind where you're connected and open, it's very different than reading that same book from like a scattered state of mind where maybe you haven't had enough time to reflect, had enough time to just mellow out and come back to baseline, before reading that book. And I think I notice that kind of stuff every single day in like the interactions that I have. So yesterday, I was basically working on some technical stuff for my website, and it was not really coming together all that well. And it just left me in this really kind of knotted up state of mind where I wasn't really at my most mindful. And I noticed that when I take that state of mind into conversations with people that I interact with at home, just being around, the interaction is very different. And I noticed that like my emotional state has an effect on the emotional state of others. So if I'm in that scattered state of mind, and what I always do, my mindfulness practice is always just to go outside and take a walk or just do a sit spot, tune in with my senses and just kind of clear out all that emotional garbage. And I come back inside from that, and it's like it's both I'm able to be present in a conversation in a very different way, but that also has an effect on how present the other person is able to be in that conversation. And so that's kind of, I don't know if that totally gets at your question there, but that's sort of one of the things that was coming up, that there's like the behavioral level of modeling where you might intentionally decide to crouch down and look at a track really closely and noticing that others follow when you do that. But then there's also just like noticing your own emotional state and how by being in a connected emotional state that also has an effect on people, maybe on a more subtle level, on a more emotional level, and it's sort of, it's that mirror neuron thing. You're starting to resonate with the other person and passing this feeling back and forth. So it definitely, there's a lot of different layers here.
So paying attention to something that you said very early in our talk, being aware of who you're with, and much of the work I've done is in the last 10 or 20 years, my mentors have said, be diligent and attentive to who you share time with. If you share time with people that are kind of dark or not in doing healthy things, you will take on that energy. You will take on that view of the world. So one of the things I think that we want to do as mentors is let us remember that we, the mentors, as well as those that may be working alongside us, need to take walks, be outside, frequent reconnections with our physical bodies and with the world around us. You refer again to a sit spot. Sit spots don't have to last for 20 or 30 or 40 minutes. They can be 5-minute immersions. I often said, I went to the bank to deposit a check today, and I said to the teller, Mary, so Mary, it's a beautiful day here in Buffalo. Will you have a chance to be outside? And she said very quickly and kind of reactive, yes, I will go to my car, I will take a ride for lunch, and I will come back, and so I will get a micro, she didn't use the word, but it sounded like a micro splash of outdoors. So being me, I said to Mary, well, I hope you pause a moment at the car door's handle, and you take a breath, and you look up, and you let the warmth of the day warm your skin. Now, Mary was polite and listened, and I pulled up. I didn't go any further, but I think it's really important to remember the need to be in a space and the gifts that it offers. Here in Buffalo, we often have pretty gray weather this time of year for periods of days. So here we're being gifted with a remarkably beautiful day. And I hope that anyone else being gifted with a remarkable, beautiful day today when they're listening to this or in the near future, puts some time aside and enjoys it, because you will be uplifted by it. You will be gifted by that which you spend time with. They can be live people. They can be an outdoor breeze. They don't have to be sentient beings. They can be abiotic qualities in the environment. You may need to listen to the sound of just rain on a roof for calming you. So get someplace where you can listen to it. Be with it. So leading by example can simply include remembering to refresh you, to replenish you. You used the phrase getting rid of that emotional stuff. That stuff that kind of sticks to us and weighs us down and scatters us. And I think we can do that remarkably frequently in very light and frequent episodes, and then we build it into our neural pathways. We build it in. The habit becomes frequent and easy to visit. So I hope our listeners, when they're leading by example, are satisfied with the experience of leading well, and in micro little episodes, we don't have to wait for long half-day immersions to be with others to lead by example. We can actually practice it without any audience at all, is what I guess I'm trying to say. So as I wrap up this piece and pass it back to you, Brian, remember that you don't need to have an audience. You can lead by example by doing it yourself, and then take that freshness, that insight, that energy that you've just recaptured or found, and take it to the next person or situation you're in. Go back to your desk, go back to the rigor of recreating your website with a fresh set of eyes and ears, and maybe knock out that snafu that was in your way. And that little break, by leading by your own example, fosters you getting that next piece done in a complex problem you're working on. So, so that's what kind of comes up for me in this moment.
Yeah. Well, I love what you were saying earlier about how this effect actually goes both ways. Like if you think about how, for everyone listening, maybe there are people in your life who you want to influence. Maybe it's your kids or your students or, different, you want to build your community and have a positive effect on your community. But I love what you were talking about, Dave, how this goes both ways too. Like this is also having an effect on you. And there's a quote that I really like. And it essentially goes that you are the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from really looking at who and becoming more aware of who are our own influences. Who are the people that we are looking to as our role models? Who are the people that we are having in our community, in our close circles that are having an effect on us? And it's not necessarily about having like everyone being like this amazing, perfect person, because everyone has flaws and everyone has challenges, and so if you look for perfect people to be like your inner circle, you're not going to find anyone. But I think just like having it be like a positive intention and surrounding yourself with people who are focused in the same kinds of directions as you, that can have a really huge impact. I mean, it makes me think about the Instincts mentoring program that I do is basically like I get together on the phone with a bunch of people who are all really focused on connecting deeply with nature and learning about plants and birds and trees and how they all work in the backyard and how it all fits together, and just really intentional about how we explore nature. And some of the people in the group are like really advanced, they've been doing it for a few years, they have some deep experiences, and then other people are like beginners. And so it's but the thing that's so cool is that because we're all we have this oneness of our focus, we're all focused on the same thing. We all model for each other different ways of engaging with the land, and through our stories, we all just learn so much from each other by doing it that way. And so I think that's a really powerful aspect of this. When you sort of when I was at Wilderness Awareness School, we would always start off our days by giving thanks. We would go around in the circle, and everyone would share one thing that you're feeling grateful for, and then we would just sort of keep in mind all the things that are supporting us to be there, and then we would always end it by saying our minds are one. And at first it was kind of like this weird sort of thing, like who says that our minds are one? But it was sort of like this little mini ceremonial thing to just sort of bring our intentions together and focus our minds together and say, hey, we're here for the same purpose. And, I've noticed that gathering in those sorts of groups where everyone is focused on the same goal, that's a really rich opportunity to sort of I think about it as like passing the energy around. It's like I'm modeling nature connection, you're modeling nature connection, and so we're passing nature connection back and forth. And as we do that, it starts to grow and it gets bigger and it has a deeper influence on us. And it's really interesting stuff. But I guess that's just the one thing that I wanted to hone in on. What you were saying is just being intentional about creating our circles of influence and allowing ourselves to be influenced by really good people and finding the gifts in the people around us so that we can just bring up the whole community that way. And it's really cool.
Yeah, so a little tangent. We are what we eat. We've all heard that. Many of us have heard that. And so we are who we hang with, and we are who we lead. So if we lead the child, take a look to the child to see what gifts the child gives. So leading by example. As a teacher for so many years, I have learned so much from the kids I've been around that it's just a matter of maintaining a level of curiosity. For many, many years, I start each year, each group, each experience, whether it be a semester or a class or whatever, and I say, I will learn more from you than you will learn from me, and I mean that in all sincerity, because it's real. It's real, and it sets the stage for me to remember I am not the guru, the expert, the font of this. This is not a one-way flow from point A to point B. I'm inviting a synergistic, dynamic, unpredictable, curious attitude to what we're about. And when we do that, when we lead in that way, by using language and acting in ways that are consistent with those qualities, curiosity and compassion and care and wise action. When the leader of something does that, it fosters a very, very powerful wave in the tribe. In native populations, this is the way it always unfolds. The doer does it, whatever, and the others are captured by the depth of the immersion of the doer, and they then are doing it as well, because the wise teacher is so quickly interweaving practice. You may stumble, you may look like a fool, you may feel awkward, and you must practice. You must do it. So no one gets down and sees it all immediately. No one knocks out the perfect triple twist, triple flip dive off the high board the first time. You start in micro steps and baby steps. So the wise teacher pays attention. When I'm teaching best, I pay attention to the need for the incremental piece of it. Don't expect them ever to master it right away. As a good teacher, pick the key components. Do it with them. Let them feel the intrigue, the curiosity of the learning of the little baby steps. And then let the bigger learning happen on its own, because it does. It will happen. It will unfold. The wiring within the learner has to happen of its own accord when it's able to happen. You as a teacher, you as a mentor, the best you can do is open up some invitations for them to come, to follow, to be with, to plant that behavioral curiosity in your behavior, and let them witness that and be that. So I know I'm speaking really broadly, and I'm not giving any real examples. Maybe a specific example will come up for the end of our talk today. But I'm really confident that when I'm at my best, and when others I'm with are trying to teach me and they're at their best, they're remembering that this all happens in little episodes, and you have to do the process. You got to be patient and maintain the stages. And some of those stages you'll have breakthrough moments. And some of those stages you'll feel just so stuck, so long, where you're feeling like, I just have to give up. This is not going anywhere. And then yet, suddenly the breakthrough moment, the tipping point, is to use a phrase that's used quite frequently these days. The cascade of learning comes out, and as Einstein and many other wise people have said, it's the simplicity of it. Once we get to the simplicity of it, we realize I was making it so much more complicated than it had to be. Right. It's really a very simple effort that the masters have gained mastery of. And I think the novice thinks it's really complex and sophisticated, and all these things are juggling all in this really crazy dynamic, when in fact it's the simple elegance of an act, like walking. We did mindful walking with the high school kids 2 weeks ago. They'd never done mindful walking. They looked at me like I was weird, but I modeled it, and they did it, with some attention. And I hope that sometime when they're moving from A to B, they'll remember what was it like to walk mindfully, to feel your feet touch the earth one after the other, to be aware of what balance feels like, rather than assume balance will occur. What does it feel like to be in or a bit out of balance? So, So, as I went on just a bit, anything strike you as being interesting, novel that you want to share? Share, Brian?
Yeah, well, the thing that I'm reflecting on is just how, if we really look at it, all learning really begins with modeling. And if we go back to, you mentioned the example of walking. Like when a baby is first learning to walk, and they've already spent I don't know how many months, just watching all the adults walk and not being able to do it, and they've just been watching and absorbing, and there comes this point where they don't have language or anything starting out to be able to really like ask you, how do you do that? And it's not like a linguistic thing. The only thing they're going off when they make that leap to, like, putting their hands in front of them and getting up to a crawl, and then gradually being able to stand with support and take that first step, they're doing it. That's all modeling. They're just looking at what other people are doing, and they're trying to do it too. And it's just this natural instinct that's built in. The same thing with talking. Like it starts with just babbling and just, since the day that they were born and even before that. I mean, I've heard stuff about how, like, in the womb there's like certain aspects of language that actually get through to the child, and it's so that when a baby is born, they already have like their capacity for hearing linguistic patterns is already starting to form, but when they first start trying to like imitate it, they're basically just babbling and making sounds, and gradually it gets to the point where they're able to put sounds together in such a way that it comes out as a word, and that's all modeling. And so I just think that it's a really core aspect of human learning, and it definitely is involved with all aspects of learning. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, someone who, if you want to learn mathematics, learn from someone who loves mathematics and who can do it like backwards and forwards and really easily, and it's just like it's like an instinct for them to do math. Whereas if you try to learn math from a teacher who, they understand it, but they don't really embody it, and it's gonna be much harder to learn math from that person. And so I guess it just speaks to the whole, let's do everything we can as mentors, as teachers, as leaders for the next generation of people growing up. Let's do everything that we can to really embody deep connection with the natural world for ourselves, so that we can pass that on in a very natural and effortless way. And I think that pretty much wraps up what I'm thinking for today. But I'll pass it back to you for any final thoughts there, Dave.
Well, just a thanks, Brian. Just first a thanks to you personally for your remarkable curiosity and way that you are an example for me and for some others that are gifted by your presence. But when I'm in your presence and have the gift, maybe once a week, once every other week, to share these talks, or maybe when we're not recording, I experience a lightness. I experience a safety net. I feel good. There's an affective domain to the human state that I know when I'm on and I'm not. When I'm feeling better, happier, curious, excited, satisfied. Those are good. Those feel pleasant. Agitated, fearful, sad, angry. Those are on the less than pleasant parts of experience. So when I'm with someone like yourself, who's there's a sense of balance and wisdom and concern and knowledge and softness of where it's not ego speaking. It's a curious capacity to want others to grow as well. So when we lead by example, I hope our listeners, as I do, gain a little contagious experience from people like Brian, and pick up, acquire the qualities that we model, and then serve to be models for others. So to do my wrap, find others that you trust and know that give you that feeling of safety and wisdom and confidence and comfort. Be with them, and then be that. Be that for someone each day. Find one person each day. But for a micro moment, you can be that. It can be a stranger in a store. It can be you alone, standing in a quiet moment in nature. But be diligent about being that person, because the feeling piece will open up really powerful qualities in your ability to lead by good example. So, I want to thank all those folks for listening, and I want to invite them to peek at, if they haven't yet, the Facebook ReWilding Conversations page. And then if you get more curious, sneak over to the Nature Mentor, and you'll hear see more about Brian or Creative Nature Play. You'll see and hear a little bit more about myself and the work I'm attempting to do in the world as change agents, and join us as this tribe of change agents on the planet.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Dave. It's been a pleasure chatting with you as always, and I look forward to next time.
Yeah, me too. Be well.